This is Consumer Friend.
Hello and welcome to the Consumer Friend podcast, your go-to place for tips, advice and discussions on how to protect your consumer rights with me, Adam Carter, and my mate LouBax, Louise Baxter. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, Ads. How are you? It's very, very rainy, though, for a Monday. It's not a great start to the week with the weather.
Very rainy, yeah. Winter's happened, doesn't it? It's definitely happening.
Oh, it really is. I quite like autumn, though. It makes me want to, tidy stuff and eat roast dinner. I quite like that.
Put on a bit of weight.
Put on a bit of winter weight, yes.
Love it. Yeah.
Carbs. Lots of carbs.
Today we have a fantastic episode lined up for all you tenants out there. As of 2021, over 4.4 million households in the UK were living in a private rented sector. That's around 19% of the population. With such a large number of people renting, understanding tenancy deposits and how to protect them is really, really crucial. In the UK, 43% of disputes regarding tenancy deposits are about cleaning and another 30% are related to property damage. These disputes often arise at the end of tenancy, making it essential to know your rights. So with me today, we are thrilled to be joined by Jennifer Harris, Head of Policy, Research and Strategy at the Tenancy Deposit Scheme, one of the largest providers of deposit protection in the UK. TDS work hard to ensure tenants and landlords are treated fairly when it comes to protecting and returning deposits. Hello, Jennifer. How are you? Thank you for coming on.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
And thank you so much for coming on. So I guess, shall we just start off with who are or what are the Tenancy Deposit Scheme, the TDS?
So TDS is the leading tenancy deposit and dispute resolution provider in the UK. So this organisation was initially established from concerns about the unfairness of the tenancy deposit system. So deposits being unfairly withheld, for example, and tenants not knowing what to do about it. So the roots of the organisation really lie in trying to make the sector fairer and more professional. And we know that renting out property can also be quite challenging for landlords as well. So we try to make life easier for tenants, landlords and letting agents in relation to deposit protection, but also in relation to different disputes and problems that might arise throughout the tenancy.
So basically, if I wanted to go and rent, I would put my deposit in with a scheme like yours, and you are currently the largest scheme, TDS.
So if you're renting out a property and you decide to take a deposit, you are required by law to protect it in one of three deposit protection schemes. So we're the largest in terms of value of deposits protected. So we protect over £2 billion worth of tenants' money across the UK.
And is that free to the consumer?
It's free for tenants, yeah, and it's free for landlords depending on tenants. Which scheme that you. This is kind of more detail than I was wanting to get into. To be honest, the gateway's not about deposits.
No, the gateway. We're not talking about deposits, right? So today, as well. So Jen, whilst obviously TDS holds deposits for consumers and tenants in relation to that landlord and tenant relationship, the part of the organisation you work for is the charity, and the reason we brought you on today is because you're launching something in November, December time, which is a gateway. Do you just want to talk to us a little bit about that? Because this is really exciting, going to be really useful for millions of consumers, millions of tenants and landlords.
Sure. So one of the things the wider TDS group does is it runs two charities. So we have one in England and Wales and one in Scotland. And it really focuses on trying to raise standards in the sector and help people understand what their rights and responsibilities are. And make sure that there's appropriate services available to help them resolve any differences or problems that might arise. Shall I go into some of the background of why we need the gateway, or do you want me to just launch into the gateway itself?
No, the background will be really interesting, again, because obviously it's quite topical at the moment because all of the news and information that's coming out around the new Renters' Rights Act, isn't it? The rights bill that's coming out for the Labour government has recently announced, which was a Conservative initiative. But now it's likely been tweaked, hasn't it? So there's been a lot of information and stuff on the news around actually these additional protection that tenants are going to get. But also there's been quite a lot of pushback from landlords about what protection are they going to get as well. So I think the background would be really interesting.
Yep. So as you mentioned, the Renters' Rights Bill is going through Parliament at the moment, and it seeks to sort of improve the quality of the private rent sector, the experience of living within the sector. So we know that tenants often face problems, for example, with the quality or condition of the property. Damp and mold is quite prevalent. We know from our research often tenants will report these issues to their landlords, and often landlords will respond. But when that issue isn't being addressed, so say they report the issue and the landlord or letting agent just isn't replying or not addressing the issue properly, tenants often won't take it any further. And that's partly because of the insecurity which exists within the sector, which is associated with Section 21, the ability of landlords to evict tenants without having to give a specific reason. So we know that leads to feelings of insecurity, and as a result, tenants might be reluctant to complain about their landlords and take that issue further. So the government's planning to remove that. They've committed to removing that. But we know that also one of the reasons why tenants won't take that issue any further, complain to their council, for example, is because they don't know about the options that exist. So we do a regular national survey with tenants, and we asked them, if you had a problem with the quality or condition of your property that your landlord wasn't addressing, would you know where to go next? 50% said no. So 50% of tenants, 50% of the 4.5 million tenants that live across England don't know where to go next if they have a problem with a property that isn't being addressed. And this is partly because it's actually, the landscape's really confusing, right? So, and housing rights are much more difficult to assert than other consumer rights, I would say, partly because that landscape is so complex. So depending on what your problem is it deposits? Is it disrepair? Is it, illegal eviction? Is it rent increase? There's lots of different places where you might go with that problem. So it might be councils, it might be an ombudsman, it might be one of a few different ombudsmen. It might be the courts. It might be the tribunal. It might be one of the adjudication schemes offered by deposit protection schemes. So that's just really confusing for consumers.
We don't make it easy. We don't make it easy for people. We have this from a lot of the stuff that we talk about on the podcast are so consumer issues. Consumer education is at an all-time low. People don't know where their rights are in relation to just buying goods, let alone, like you say, rental rights or your tenancy rights, or where to go to access that information. Like when we talk about fraud and scams on the podcast as well, we know that consumers a lot of the time don't report the fact they've been a victim of a crime because they don't know where to go.
Exactly.
They don't know because too many people to report to or speak to.
It's so complicated. And so I think the government's really missing a trick here. There's this assumption we remove Section 21, tenants will be empowered to complain about poor landlord practices or unfair rent increases, and therefore the sector will improve. But if tenants don't know where to go with that complaint, then how are things going to improve? I think they're really missing a trick there.
So Section 21, just to clarify, just for our listeners, and I think probably for ads as well around this, is about it's no fault evictions, right? So you could historically, you can be evicted for no reason. Now there has to be certain criteria for people to be evicted. So it's not, and there's other things like now with the new legislation, you can't be rejected from renting a property because you've got children or because you want to bring your pet along. There's lots of additional protections coming in from a tenant perspective, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. So for Section 21, the concern that some tenant groups have had is that in the past, in some cases, that it might be used as a retaliatory eviction. So a tenant complains about an issue in their property and then they get evicted as a result. And there's no real protection because the landlord doesn't need to give a reason. Now, almost regardless of the frequency in which that happens, the fact that it could happen, we know leads to insecurity. Tenants feel like they could lose a property and it's really unaffordable to rent at the moment. It's really hard to find a property. So people do feel nervous about making complaints and they think, do you know what? I'll just suck it up. I'll just live with it. I'll just live with the damp or mold, or I'll just, whatever it might be.
Is there any pressure on landlords to provide that information for whenever, if anything was to go wrong in the homes? Are they required by law to provide information on how to complain or get problems fixed?
Yep. So by law, at the start of the tenancy, landlords and letting agents are required to supply a document called the How to Rent Guide. And in that document, it outlines tenants' rights and responsibilities and what to do if they have a problem with their tenancy. Now, we know from our research that very few tenants actually recall receiving that document. That doesn't necessarily mean it isn't being provided, but it's being provided at the start of a tenancy alongside a big stack of papers,
Along
your
with
tenancy
loads of other
agreements,
things.
your deposit protection certificate, your energy performance certificate, all the bits and bobs. You're moving in, you're stressed, someone hands you a big pack of paper, you're not going to sit there and read through it back to back. You're just trying to get settled into your new property. It goes into a drawer and stays there. Goes into a drawer, and I think that's part of the issue. And also, if you look at the document, it's about 20 pages long and it's lots of text, and it's just not easy for consumers to digest, especially if you're having a problem and you're feeling stressed. A really long, wordy document is not necessarily what you need to help you figure out what to do. And I would say that's the same kind of problem exists with a lot of the information that's online for tenants, because there is a lot of information out there, almost too much, one could argue, but it's very text heavy, big long Word documents, and figuring out which one's the most reliable, how it relates to your personal circumstance. It's really difficult. It's really difficult for tenants. And in some ways, I would say, actually, it's difficult for landlords too, because a lot of landlords have just one property, or, between 1 and 4, the large majority have just 1 or 2 or 3 properties, and they rent out alongside other employment to save for their retirement, for example. They're not renting out properties as a professional business. And yet there's all these regulations, there's all these laws that are constantly changing and becoming more complex, and that's happening indeed now. There's going to be new requirements that landlords have to adhere to, decent home standards, etc. And actually, we know from our research that keeping on top of that can be really difficult for landlords. And we know from our research that landlords feel that's just not clearly communicated to them.
We quite often have the conversation around, like, small businesses, the regulations are really heavy across the piece in relation to what businesses have to do. And there's an expectation that because you're in business that you can understand all that information. And that's not true. So you end up with you get vulnerable consumers, but you end up with vulnerable businesses as well. Or like vulnerable landlords in this case, because you're expecting people to understand all that information. Just on one of the other points that you made, Jen, around the decent home standard now. So again, in the new legislation that's coming, it says that landlords have to maintain properties to a decent standard. We don't actually know what that means yet in practice, because that's not been drilled down yet, has it?
No, it hasn't been confirmed yet. And I think that's part of the problem with lawmaking in this area. It's not always very clear. It can be characterized by a series of stop and starts, like with the minimum energy efficiency requirements. At first it was, you're all going to have to be, C by 2025 or whatever it was. And then, oh no, actually we're going to, that's going to change. And now it's been introduced by 2030. But yeah, it's not yet been definitely confirmed, and it is confusing. There's a lot of stop and starts and a lot of and I think it can make people feel very uncertain, also difficult to plan for the future.
No, but also, so from the latest statistics and back to the NICE research ads, when we looked at that, renters were identified as a group of consumers that are potentially more situationally vulnerable at the moment. I think the statistic on this one was, I can tell you because I've got it in front of me, 24% of working renters have missed a payment in the last 12 months. So the cost of living crisis, and which I now will get fined for saying, Adam, the cost of living...
I think we're over it now, aren't we?
I think we're over it. I think I owe you £1 million.
You've already given me all the wine.
I owe you £1 million for all of the times I've said it. But we're seeing that those people that are in rental properties are becoming more situationally vulnerable, more marketplace vulnerable. That increased stress, those increased costs, etc. But again, that's the same for landlords. But again, we need to make it easier to access the information, and the right information at the right time, because like you've just said, there's no point trying to give a consumer or a landlord, in fact, 50 million pages of words, because nobody has the capacity to read that. So it's about relevant information at the right time, which is where I think your new portal is coming into play.
Yeah, absolutely. And the right time, I think, so it's a really key point, because in the same way, we only read the instruction manuals for stuff when it breaks or when it goes wrong, right? And it's the same when things go wrong in a tenancy. People are only looking for information when they have a problem or issue, and it needs to be provided in the right way and available at the right time. So this new My Housing Issue Gateway service is an initiative being developed by the TDS Charitable Foundation, which is essentially a website which will help people figure out where to go and what to do when they have a problem with their rented property. The idea is that it's delivered in a really interactive and engaging way. So rather than big long scripts of text. People just answer short questions, and they're given an action plan which is personalized to them and the specific problem that they're facing. Within this gateway, there's lots of different little tools to help people address their problems. So there might be letter templates, telephone scripts, for example, to help them, with that kind of more official correspondence, which we know can feel quite daunting at times, be that to the letting agent or to an ombudsman. All those different steps are explained in the website itself. There's lots of links to different organizations and resources that can help you. Within that as well, the final step might be, yes, you need to go to your council, need to go to an official body to make a complaint. But we're also trying to encourage people to resolve things amicably wherever possible. And we know that for both landlords and tenants, that relationship is important. We know often both of them want the tenancy to continue. So it's trying to provide resources and tools and tips and tricks to help people resolve it early and consensually wherever possible. But if that's not possible, ensure that tenants are able to figure out where to go.
It's provide, like you say, it's that bite-sized information, isn't it? Because actually, where we've talked about the landscape being so complicated, if we drill it down and we say this, consumers, tenants, people don't care who helps them as long as somebody does. So it's just getting that right information at the right time, which the portal, I keep calling it a portal, it's a gateway, isn't it? The gateway.
It's a gateway. Yeah, we're calling it a gateway.
Yeah. Will provide that assistance in simple language, in simple terms, so consumers get that right information at the right time.
But you're also giving trusted advice. You're not just going onto the internet where you can just search for anything and you think you've got the right advice, whereas actually, not everything on the internet is true.
What?
Accurate. I know. So you're giving that trusted, almost verified advice. You're giving people, renters, tenants, the confidence to actually go to the right people armed with the right advice and the right information.
Absolutely. And what we often hear from tenants is when we speak to them about the various challenges they face in their tenancies is there's not one place that's just for private renters. It's that's really just focused for them. And given that, the significant number of people that rent, given how often problems and challenges do occur, and given, as you said, Louise, that, more and more people are living in the sector that might be experiencing different vulnerabilities, I think having that one sort of trusted place that people can go to help them figure out where to go. And if they do need a little bit more assistance, say they look at the tool and they say, actually, I need a little bit more help. There's signposting and, advice about where to get that support. But we actually think with information, a lot of tenants as consumers can be empowered to resolve the problem for themselves. They just need that accurate, easy to access information.
But it's that management of expectations, isn't it? We know, because again, people, if people don't know what their rights are, that fuels sometimes the problems around things. And actually, if the information is the same for the tenant or the landlord, everybody knows where they are, which allows that conversation, go, right, this is what I'm entitled to, this is what I'm entitled to. Then you meet in the middle in relation to it, because like you said, people don't want to get into confrontation generally. It's not something that people are leaning into like that. It doesn't need to be like that, but armed with the right information in simple terms means that those resolutions, it can be resolved much easier for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think it's also, getting information that's simple and accessible, but also personalized. And I think that's where, with the housing information and advice that's currently available, it doesn't make best use of the potential that technology can offer us to make a diagnosis or an assessment of people's problem and then provide something that's a little bit more tailored. So simple, easy to understand, but also personal to you. I think is offering something different than what's currently out there. One of the things that will be available within the gateway is a free sort of mid-tenancy resolution service. So there's, as I said, tools, templates, telephone scripts, to help people try to resolve the problems by themselves. But if they would like a little bit of assistance, they'll be able to access this tenancy redress service for free. So if you have a problem, could it be around disrepair, rent arrears, damp, mold, antisocial behaviour. I can't think of all the different topics.
That's fine. Right. So yeah, So with the resolution service, so do landlords have to be like one of your member organisation for tenants to access, or is that just free for everybody?
So the tenancy redress service is free for all tenants. So anybody, any tenant can access it. If
excellent.
a landlord wants to initiate the use of the service, if the landlord wants to use it, they have to protect their deposit with TDS or be a member of the NRLA. But if the tenant initiates it, it's free to everybody.
What's the NRLA?
Excellent, yeah.
Sorry?
The National Residential Landlord Association.
There's a lot of, see, it's complicated, Adam. This
so
is the
complicated. It's too much stuff. But this is what we find in our day job in the scams world. How there's so many different agencies combating so many different types of fraud, and no one's got a clue what to do and how to report it and how to provide that consumer education piece.
But I have to say, in every bit of the world that I work in, it's like this everywhere.
Yeah.
And like
really
from a consumer, it's just impossible. Like, again, we work in this space, and I find that sometimes I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. But we do know what we're doing, and we have far more knowledge than the average person. So again, for an average consumer, just to be able to navigate this, just to get some help or information, is impossible.
No, I think that's really true because, I've been doing housing policy research for over 12 years now. And still sometimes when I sit down and I think, exactly how that landscape fits together and, where you would go with a specific problem, I have to sit down and think about it. It's not simple. It's not simple, So I really think this is, and at the moment it is a signposting tool. It's a diagnostic tool. Whether or not you're a tenant or a landlord or someone working in the space, do go on and have a play, have a look, even if you don't have a problem at the moment, and see what it can offer, because it might be that, it could be something useful for you to signpost your customers to, or if you're supporting tenants or you're working in this space, you might be able to signpost people to the website. But we hope that in the future we can build it out to something that looks a little bit more like a single access point to access housing redress. So this is something that's lots of different experts working in this space have been recommending for about 20 years, to be honest. They said, this is so complicated. Yeah. We need to make it simpler. If there was one access point that people could go to and they would be sort of referred on directly, or they could make the complaint there directly, that would be much better. So we hope that this can be built out to look something like that. I'm not sure if I'm going into too much.
No, it's absolutely fine.
No,
it's a really good place to start, where there's one kind of gateway where people can go with any problems they may have, and it can signpost them to the right place. And also, it's something that's going to improve and evolve over time, and it will only get better.
Absolutely, and I think it's quite. You kind of have to see it to understand it. But with these action plans, it is really like a step by step sort of plan for people, a step by step action plan that people can adopt, and you just get the bits that are relevant to you. So it asks you what you've already done, and say you've already reported it to your landlord or letting agent, and say you've already written an official letter, whatever it might be. You're just going to get the bits of information that are relevant to where you are at in the process of trying to resolve that issue. Some people will have done absolutely nothing. Some people will be a little bit further along. So again, it's getting people just as much information that they need in order to move forward.
And do you have to register who you are, so you're not going in over and over again and filling out the same information? It knows who you are, it recognises who you are, and it kind of tells you where you're at.
You'll be able to, at the end, once you've gone through sort of the different questions to give you this personalised plan, you'll be able to download that or save it or email it to yourself, so you can refer back to it, because of course some of the different steps might take a little bit of time, so you can save it and then refer back to it.
This will be something as well, because we did a campaign on rental scams, specifically targeted quite at students as well, because we know it's that time of year where students will be looking for rental properties. This sort of tool will be really useful for universities as well, and for students going into that sort of, because again, massive amounts of vulnerability there from a student perspective, student accommodation, renting, potentially privately renting if they haven't managed to get into student halls. And again, it's that first time moving away from home, isn't it? So you've got that like potentially lack of knowledge, which increases that susceptibility or potential vulnerability for consumers. So again, this is something that's going to be really useful for that.
Yeah,
we'll put it on the website when it's done as well. We'll get it on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think there's real potential. We've been speaking to lots of different organisations and government bodies and stuff, and I think there's real interest in developing this type of tool in other consumer markets as well, so that people can get, like you mentioned, information that's easier to access, personal
like
to their
ours.
situation.
Like we're about to
yours.
launch that. Yeah, we're about to launch something on that, but we'll save that for another podcast. But we are going to launch something exciting.
The technology is there. We just need to be able to use it properly, don't we? That's the thing.
Yeah.
The technology is there for us to use. We just got to create these tools for people to use that are simple to use.
Absolutely. And if, the inspiration for the gateway come off the back of similar tools that exist in other countries. So in Belgium, for example, in Canada, in the Netherlands, there's similar tools to help consumers figure out where to go when they have a problem or a dispute. And we looked at some of these different websites, and I was like, why doesn't something like this exist in England? That's nuts.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy.
It is.
Whereas there's so many tools and bits of software out there for businesses to get their clients on board and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's nothing actually for consumers. But hopefully there will be. And there now is for tenants. And will be for consumers, Louise, won't there?
There will be for consumers. Yes, we will.
Jennifer, thank you so much for coming today. It's been really insightful. Just one final piece, I guess, is how do people access the gateway?
So it will be in lots of different places, including on the TDS Charitable Foundation website and TDS Group's website. We hope you there at Consumer Friend will be hosted on your website as well. We
absolutely will, yeah.
And there'll be, there's lots and lots of different organisations that we're in touch with. So hopefully you'll be seeing it crop up in many different places. But initially you can go to Consumer Friend, you can come to TDS Charitable Foundation and access it through those routes.
It will be there. Consumer Friend, as ever, is available at consumerfriend.org.uk. Please like, subscribe and share and rate and all that fun stuff that we like people doing on the podcast platforms. Louise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ads.
And Jennifer, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
This is Consumer Friend.